For almost as long as films have been made, there have been stories of productions that seem to attract bad luck. Actors have spoken about strange coincidences. Directors have remembered accidents that happened at the worst possible moment. Sets have caught fire, performers have been injured, and tragedies have sometimes followed long after filming ended. Over the years, certain productions have developed reputations of their own. People still talk about The Omen, where lightning strikes, plane incidents, and a horrific car crash became part of the film's mythology. Others point to The Exorcist, remembered not only for terrifying audiences, but for fires, injuries, and stories of unease during production. There are films like The Crow, where a real-life tragedy forever changed the way the movie is remembered. Most of these stories are only connected in hindsight. Events that might have been seen as isolated become linked together because they happened on the same production. A coincidence becomes a pattern. A rumour becomes part of that folklore. Before long, an ordinary film has become known as a cursed one. But if there is one title that almost always appears at the top of every list of supposedly cursed films, it's Poltergeist. Unlike many productions, the story surrounding Poltergeist did not begin years after its release. It began with the film itself. A story about disturbed graves, a family haunted after moving into their dream home, and a production that, according to those who worked on it, used real human skeletons while bringing that story to life. Whether you believe in curses or not, what followed over the next few years ensured that Poltergeist would never simply be remembered as another horror film. Instead, it became one of Hollywood's most enduring legends.
Here's a tip for you. There's a podcast out there with fans waiting to be your next customer. They tune in every week, they trust the host, and that host wants to talk about brands like yours in their own words to their audience. The problem is, you just haven't been introduced yet. We're Acast, where that introduction happens. As the world's largest podcast marketplace, we let you browse shows, see who's listening, and book host-read sponsorships or run your own ads all from one platform. Transparent pricing, real-time data, complete control. Start advertising on podcasts by visiting acast.com/advertise.
Ever notice how life's best stories don't happen in your living room? They happen on the open road, out on the water, or parked under the stars. At Progressive, they get that you want to focus on the experience, not worry about the what-ifs. That's why they offer quality insurance designed for your ride, whether that's a boat, RV, or motorcycle. Adventure with confidence. Visit Progressive.com and see how easy it is to protect your favorite way to get away. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in D.C. Prices vary based on how you buy.
You've got social dialed in. Search is doing its thing. So why do your marketing results look the same as 6 months ago? That's because you're fishing in the same pond as everyone else. Podcast listeners are a different audience entirely. More engaged, harder to reach through traditional channels, and ready to act when someone they trust makes a recommendation. We're Acast, and we put them right in front of you. Browse thousands of the world's leading podcasts, book host reads or run your own ads, and track every conversion in real time. Same skills you already have, brand new results. Acast. Acast.com/advertise.
Hello, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Toby.
And welcome to the Whispering Woods podcast. This episode is all about
the Poltergeist curse.
Yeah. So I can actually talk about it in this episode because I nearly started talking about it too much in the haunted episode.
Yes.
And if you haven't listened to it, it is connected. But first of all, before we get into that, we have a new patron.
Katie.
Hi, Katie. And this is Katie, who's the mother of Sydney. And Sydney writes these wonderful, scary stories. And I've done an episode with his stories, which will come out in October for 31 Days of Halloween. But hi, Katie, and thank you so much for supporting the podcast. We really, really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very much.
Right, if you'd like to support the podcast, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/The Whispering Woods, where we have a number of tiers. You can listen ad-free and in advance for a small monthly fee. We're also on Apple Premium, where for $4.99 a month, you can listen to all episodes ad-free and in advance. My spiel is done. I do it in like one breath. I'm pretty proud of that. And I didn't mess it up at all.
Yeah, fair play.
We're also on most social medias and the links are in the podcast notes. Right, let's get into this, shall we? Are you ready for the story?
Yes, I am.
Jo Beth Williams was waist deep in mud, water and rain, filming one of the most famous scenes in Poltergeist. Around her, skeletons rose from the flooded swimming pool. In the film, the moment comes when the Freeling family's house has fully turned against them. Coffins burst through the earth, human remains surface through the mud, and Diane Freeling is trapped in the middle of it all while the storm rages around her. For years, that scene became one of the images people remembered most from Poltergeist. It was chaotic, horrible, and perfectly matched to the film's central idea, a modern family home built over the dead. Then came the story behind it. The skeletons were not all plastic props. According to accounts from people connected with the production, including Jo Beth Williams herself, real human skeletons were used during filming. They were medical skeletons, reportedly easier and cheaper to obtain than making convincing artificial ones at the time. That detail became the starting point for one of Hollywood's most enduring curse legends. A film about disturbed graves had used real human remains on screen, and within a few years, several people connected to the Poltergeist films would be dead. Long before anyone spoke about a curse, Poltergeist began as an idea from Steven Spielberg. By the end of the 1970s, Spielberg had become fascinated by the contrast between ordinary suburban life and extraordinary events. Rather than setting a ghost story inside an isolated mansion or a centuries-old castle, he wanted to place it somewhere instantly familiar. The setting would be a modern housing estate with tree-lined streets, tidy gardens, and families who believed they had found the perfect place to live. It reflected what was happening across much of America at the time. New housing developments were appearing on the edges of towns and cities, replacing open land with rows of almost identical homes. They represented a new start for thousands of families. But Spielberg imagined what might happen if that new beginning had been built on something forgotten. The result was Poltergeist. Spielberg developed the story while he was also working on what would become E.T. Because he had committed to directing E.T., he brought in Tobe Hooper to direct Poltergeist. Hooper had earned a reputation with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, released in 1974, and was known for creating tension without relying on elaborate visual effects. Although Hooper received the directing credit, Spielberg remained deeply involved throughout production. He produced the film, co-wrote the screenplay with Michael Grace and Mark Victor, visited the set regularly, and worked closely on the design of many of the sequences. That close collaboration has led to years of discussion about how the creative responsibilities were divided. But everyone involved agreed that the film grew from Spielberg's original story. Filming began in the spring of 1981. The exterior of the Freeling family home was filmed at a real house at 4267 Roxbury Street in Simi Valley, California. It was chosen because it looked exactly like the sort of neighborhood the filmmakers wanted. Quiet, comfortable, and completely ordinary. Decades later, fans of the film still visit the street, where the house remains much as it did when cameras first arrived there more than 40 years ago. Most of the interior scenes were filmed on sound stages at MGM Studios in Culver City. Building the house inside a studio gave the production complete control over the supernatural effects. Walls could shake, ceilings could open, furniture could move without visible wires, and entire rooms could be rebuilt to accommodate increasingly elaborate sequences. The famous swimming pool scene was also created on a specially constructed set. The production excavated a large pit, filled it with water and mud, and buried dozens of skeletons beneath the surface so they could emerge during filming. It was here that JoBeth Williams spent days filming under rain machines, surrounded by the skeletons that would later become one of the most talked about details in Hollywood history. At the time, however, nobody was talking about curses. The cast and crew were simply making what they hoped would be a successful supernatural film. The stories that would give Poltergeist its darker reputation had not yet begun. Before Poltergeist became a film, there were earlier stories that seemed to lead towards it. The first was a real case from 1958, known as the Seaford Poltergeist, or the Herman House Haunting. The Herman family lived in Seaford on Long Island, New York, in an ordinary suburban home. In February 1958, strange things began happening inside the house. It started with bottles, caps popped off by themselves, containers moved, and the family heard unexplained noises around the home. The activity continued for several weeks. Reports from the case describe objects being moved, loud bangs, an exploding bowl of sugar, and a bookcase overturning. Police were called, and the case attracted attention beyond the local neighborhood. Researchers connected to Duke University's parapsychology unit also looked into it, placing the Herman House into mid-20th century poltergeist lore. The Seaford case was not the plot of Poltergeist. There was no television static or cemetery development, and no child pulled into the spirit world. But it did have the thing Poltergeist would later use so well: an ordinary family in an ordinary suburban home, suddenly living with something they could not explain. There is another possible influence too. In 1962, The Twilight Zone aired an episode called Little Girl Lost, written by Richard Matheson. In that story, a young girl disappears from her bedroom into another dimension, while her parents can still hear her voice nearby. Matheson later said that Steven Spielberg had asked to see a copy of the episode before Poltergeist was made. That connection is easy to hear in Poltergeist: a missing little girl, a desperate family, and a voice coming from somewhere just out of reach. So the film did not come from one single source. It seems to sit between several things: a real suburban poltergeist case from Long Island, an earlier television story about a child lost beyond the walls of her bedroom, and Spielberg's own interest in bringing the supernatural into the middle of modern family life. For years, cinema audiences simply assumed the skeletons in the swimming pool were props. It seemed the obvious explanation. Horror films had always relied on rubber bodies, plaster skulls, and carefully painted special effects. There was little reason to think Poltergeist would be any different. The story only began to emerge after the film's release. JoBeth Williams, who played Diane Freeling, has spoken on several occasions about filming the swimming pool sequence. According to Williams, she believes she was climbing over artificial skeletons while spending long hours in the mud and water. It was only later, she said, that she learned at least some of the skeletons used during filming had been genuine human skeletons. Other members of the production have repeated the same basic account over the years. The explanation was surprisingly practical rather than theatrical. During the late 20th century, real human skeletons were commonly supplied to medical schools, universities, and teaching institutions. They could also be hired or purchased through companies supplying medical and scientific equipment. Producing large numbers of convincing artificial skeletons for a film was both expensive and time-consuming, while genuine anatomical skeletons were relatively inexpensive and already available. Special effects artist Craig Reardon later confirmed that real skeletons were used, alongside manufactured ones during production. According to those involved, the decision had nothing to do with creating publicity or adding authenticity to the story. It was simply considered the most practical option available at the time. Even so, the revelation surprised many people. The film itself tells the story of a housing estate built over a cemetery, where the dead have been left beneath the ground. One of its most memorable scenes shows coffins breaking through the earth as skeletons rise around Diane Freeling in the flooded excavation. To then discover that some of those skeletons had once belonged to real people gave the sequence an entirely different reputation. As the years passed, that detail became inseparable from the wider legend. Articles about the so-called Poltergeist curse almost always began with the same image: a terrified actress, a flooded swimming pool, and real human skeletons emerging from the mud. No one involved with the production suggested there was anything unlawful about their use. The skeletons were understood to have come from legitimate medical suppliers, as was common practice at the time. But once the tragedies surrounding the cast began to unfold, many people looked back to that decision as the moment where the legend itself had started. Away from the swimming pool and the skeletons, another part of Poltergeist became tied to the curse story: the clown doll. It sits in Robbie Freeling's bedroom, in a chair, grinning in the corner. It's already unsettling before anything happens. The face is too fixed, the smile too wide, and the whole thing feels as though it's waiting for the right moment to move. During filming, the scene was created using a mechanical clown built to wrap around actor Oliver Robbins, who played Robbie. Years later, Robbins said that during one take, the clown's arms tightened around his neck and he began to struggle. At first, those watching thought he was acting, but according to Robbins, Steven Spielberg realised something was wrong and pulled him free. Robbins survived, and the incident is usually described as a frightening special effects accident rather than anything supernatural. But in the years that followed, when people began collecting stories around the Poltergeist curse, the clown became part of the same legend. For many viewers, the clown scene was the moment that stayed with them long after the credits rolled. It took something from a child's bedroom and turned it into a threat. It made a toy feel dangerous, and once the curse story began to grow, that grinning clown became one more object people remembered when they talked about the darker side of Poltergeist. The first real tragedy connected to Poltergeist came only months after the film was released. Dominique Dunne played Dana Freeling, the eldest daughter of the family. She was 22 years old, and Poltergeist was her first major film role. By the time the film reached cinemas in 1982, she seemed to be at the beginning of a much bigger career. On 30th of October 1982, Dominique was at her home in West Hollywood, rehearsing scenes with actor David Packer for the television series V, when her former boyfriend, John Thomas Sweeney, arrived at the house. Their relationship had already ended. It had also already been violent. Dominique went outside to speak to him. Sweeney attacked her on the driveway and strangled her. Packer, who was still inside the house, later said he tried to get help after realizing something was wrong. Police arrived and found Sweeney nearby. Dominique was taken to Sinai Medical Center and placed on life support, but she never regained consciousness. She died on 4th of November 1982. She was 22. Sweeney was later tried for killing her and convicted of voluntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to prison and served only a few years before being released. Dominique Dunne's death was not a mystery, and it was not originally spoken about as part of a supernatural curse. It was a brutal act of violence against a young woman whose life and career had barely begun. But because it happened so soon after Poltergeist, her name became the first attached to the legend that followed. The film had opened in June. By November, one of its young stars was dead. After Dominique Dunne's death, the curse story did not fully form straight away. It began to grow with the second film. Poltergeist 2, The Other Side, was released in 1986, and its most unsettling new figure was Reverend Henry Kane, played by Julian Beck. Kane appears as a thin, ghostly creature with a soft voice, hollow features, and an almost corpse-like presence. Even before viewers knew anything about the actor behind the role, the character looked as though he'd stepped out of the grave. Julian Beck was already seriously ill when he made the film. He'd been diagnosed with stomach cancer, and his illness gave his appearance in Poltergeist 2 an extra layer of unease. The gauntness that made Kane so frightening on screen was not only makeup or performance. Beck was dying while the film was being made. He died on 14th of September, 1985. He was 60 years old. Poltergeist 2 was released the following year, meaning audiences saw Reverend Kane after the actor who played him had already died. For the curse legend, Beck's death became the second major name added to the story. Dominique Dunne had died after the first film. Julian Beck died before the second film reached cinemas. And by then, people were beginning to notice that death seemed to follow the franchise. The next name attached to the Poltergeist curse was Will Sampson. Sampson joined the series in Poltergeist 2, The Other Side, playing Taylor, a Native American spiritual figure who helps the Freeling family. He was already well known for his role as Chief Bromden in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and his presence in Poltergeist 2 gave the film a very different kind of supernatural authority. There's also a story that Sampson performed a blessing or cleansing on the set after filming, reportedly because of unease around the production. That story became another part of the wider curse legend, especially when people began linking the film's subject matter with the deaths connected to it. Sampson died on 3rd of June 1987 after complications connected to a heart and lung transplant. He was 53. By that point, 3 performers connected to the Poltergeist films had died within 5 years of the original release: Dominique Dunne, Julian Beck, and Will Sampson. The pattern people would later call a curse was becoming harder for fans to ignore. The death that really fixed the curse story was that of Heather O'Rourke. Heather played Carol Ann Freeling, the little girl at the centre of Poltergeist. She was only 5 years old when she was cast, and her line, "They're here," became one of the most famous in horror history. She returned for Poltergeist 2 and Poltergeist 3, making her the face of the franchise more than anyone else. In January 1988, Heather became seriously ill. She'd previously been treated for what doctors believed was Crohn's disease, but her condition suddenly worsened. On February 1st, 1988, she collapsed at home and was taken to hospital. Doctors discovered she had an undiagnosed intestinal condition that had caused a bowel obstruction, leading to septic shock. She was 12 years old. Her death came before the release of Poltergeist 3, and it changed the way people spoke about the films. Dominique Dunne had died young. Julian Beck and Will Sampson had died after the second film. Now Carol Ann herself was gone. After Heather O'Rourke's death, the idea of a poltergeist curse became part of the story surrounding the franchise. Poltergeist 3 was released in 1988, only a few months after Heather O'Rourke's death. The film moved the story away from the suburban home and into a Chicago high-rise, with Carol Ann now living with relatives. By the time the audiences saw it, Heather was no longer alive, and that changed the atmosphere around the film before anyone even entered the cinema. Her death also affected the production itself. Heather had completed much of her work before she died, but some additional material was still needed. A body double was used for certain shots, and the ending was changed after her death. That meant the final Poltergeist film reached audiences with the child at the centre of the franchise already gone. For the cursed legend, this was the point where the story became almost impossible to separate from the films themselves. The original had used real skeletons. Dominique Dunne had been murdered months after the first film. Julian Beck had died before the second film was released. Will Sampson had died the following year. Then Heather O'Rourke died at 12 before the third film came out. By the end of the trilogy, the reputation of Poltergeist had changed. It was no longer remembered only as a hit supernatural film from the 1980s. It was remembered as one of Hollywood's most famous cursed productions. Heather O'Rourke's death created an unexpected problem for MGM. By the beginning of 1988, when Poltergeist 3 was in post-production, and the studio was preparing for its summer release, then on the 1st of February, Heather died at the age of 12, and the film suddenly became much more than a final chapter of a successful horror franchise. It was now the last screen appearance of the little girl who'd become the face of Poltergeist. The studio found itself in an uncomfortable position. It still had a film to release, but it also had to avoid giving the impression that it was exploiting the death of a child actress to generate publicity. Promotional interviews and advertising were handled carefully, and the attention surrounding the release inevitably focused on Heather rather than the story itself. When Poltergeist 3 finally reached cinemas in June 1988, they were watching Heather O'Rourke's final performance. There was another incident before the final film reached cinemas. During the making of Poltergeist 3, and the production had moved away from the Freeling house and into the glass and mirror world of a Chicago high-rise. Most of the effects were created practically on set, rather than added later. On 13th of May 1987, while filming a snow-covered parking garage sequence in Oak Brook Terrace, Illinois, a special effects explosion went wrong. Several cars covered in polystyrene foam caught fire, and the blaze quickly became serious. A maintenance worker and 2 firefighters were injured. The damage to the building was later estimated at around $250,000. It was not supernatural, and it was not mysterious. But once the curse story had taken hold, the fire became another piece of the legend. A fire on the third film set only gave people one more reason, to say that something seemed to follow the franchise.
While every other channel is fighting for your customers' attention, podcasts are where they've already given it. No one accidentally listens to a podcast for 45 minutes. They choose to be here. They trust the voice in their ears, and when that voice talks about your brand, it doesn't sound like advertising. It sounds like a recommendation from a friend. Acast gives you that trust at scale. Digital precision, host-read authenticity, and performance data that proves it worked. Don't fight for attention. Buy it with Acast. Learn more by visiting acast.com/advertise.
So there was a lot going on there, and I know, it can be coincidence, but a lot of deaths, and especially the little one, 12 years old.
Nah, it's all it's rigged.
Yeah, it's just mad. It really is. And sad. And the poor actress, I did listen to a podcast about her murder, and it was awful. The guy, I would say more, but I'm just going to say he was a brute, and that really doesn't work well, but I think brute, without me effing and jeffing, is a good word to use for that. And I will say that, because it's not him. And like I nearly over-mentioned in the Haunted episode, I didn't realise that the really scary guy in Poltergeist 2, God is in his holy temple guy, that he was dying of cancer, and no wonder he looked so ill, the poor man. The poor man. So, yeah. One of those films.
Yeah.
Cursed Hollywood.
Some weird thing going on there. Yeah, it's definitely Hollywood.
Hollywood's got some weird vibes for me at the moment.
It's always been weird.
Yeah.
There's some weird stuff going on there.
There is. There really, really is.
It's all part of the Matrix and that.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Well, that's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll catch up with you again soon.
We will indeed. I'll catch you again on Thursday for the Reddit and listener story episode. Take care, everyone.
Goodbye.
Zona? Is that a word? In the 2026 Kia Sportage Turbo Hybrid, it might as well be, because it can be one road trip. It's all about turbocharged power and hybrid efficiency working together, so you get the thrill of quick acceleration and the satisfaction of fuel efficiency. Book a test drive and keep the adventure going. Kia, movement that inspires.
Call 800-3334-KIA for details. Always drive safely.
While every other channel is fighting for your customers' attention, podcasts are where they've already given it. No one accidentally listens to a podcast for 45 minutes. They choose to be here. They trust the voice in their ears, and when that voice talks about your brand, it doesn't sound like advertising. It sounds like a recommendation from a friend. Acast gives you that trust at scale. Digital precision, host-read authenticity, and performance data that proves it worked. Don't fight for attention. Buy it with Acast. Learn more by visiting acast.com/advertise.
The stories told on the Whispering Woods are inspired by historical records, witness reports, and local folklore. While every effort is made to research and represent events accurately, some details, names, and locations may differ from official accounts or have been changed out of respect for those involved. These episodes are created for storytelling and entertainment purposes and should not be considered definitive fact or investigative journalism.